Interview conducted with Mr. E. L. Jim Horton, Horton, at his office in the Rotunda Building, 4301 Congress Street, Charlotte, North Carolina. Interview conducted August 16th, 1993 by Dr. Charles Johnson, the University of Tennessee Center for the Study of War and Society. 19.
Kind of lead off with your profile or whatever you'd like me to talk about.
I generally start off just asking kind of when you joined the service and where you were from before that and why you joined and kind of what happened to you in the early part of your time in the military. Where were you from originally? Where were you born?
I was born in Farmington, Missouri. Went to the University of Missouri. I had a reserve commission.
Okay, your undergraduate, what did you, engineering or?
No, business.
Business?
Business administration.
And you were in the ROTC there?
I was in ROTC. Called active duty in November of 1940.
About a year before the war then?
Yeah. Went to Leavenworth, Kansas, first duty. Then volunteered to go to the Philippines for a one-year tour and got over there in January of 1941 and was assigned to the 57th Infantry, Philippine Scouts. In August of 1941, a group of us were sent out to train the Philippine Army. So all during the war, I was with the Philippine Army, which is not the same as Scouts.
Okay.
And those...
Did the Scouts have entirely officers from the States, or were there Filipino officers as well as...
most every officer was an officer from the States. And so all of us were officers from the States, and we were instructors for the Philippine Army, who had their own officers, but we were there to instruct. And when the war began, we stayed, and I was then in the 21st Infantry in the Philippine Army. As
were you on Luzon, or?
I was on Luzon, yes. And so we started out at Lingayen Gulf and moved all the way back to Bataan.
Did you have contact with the Japanese as you were moving back?
Yep, we did.
How did that go? This was the first time anybody shot at you on purpose.
Well, we got back there, things were pretty disorganized in the beginning. But we did move back and got back and set up a line of resistance back in Bataan. We lost very few troops and moved back to Bataan. But we really were commanding those troops, although they had their own officers, and our official position was instructors. We were in command of the troops.
What sort of equipment did you have?
The Philippine Army had coconut fiber helmets, an Enfield rifle, and those young soldiers, most of them were fairly small, as you know, and could hardly get the stock up to their shoulders. Had to fire the gun from the muscle in their arm. And they had tennis shoes and khaki uniforms.
Were you carrying an 03 Springfield, or?
Yes, we had a caliber 45 pistol in Springfield rifle.
Did you have much in the way of heavy equipment?
No, we had a water-cooled 50 caliber machine gun, and for an infantry battalion, that's really the heaviest gun we had.
Not very much.
Not very much, no. We had a few mortars, small mortars, but ineffective.
And for transportation, mainly your feet, or?
Yeah, we started out, we had some horses in the beginning, but they didn't last very long till we had to eat them. And then there were some old trucks, and we confiscated some civilian automobiles that we used until they were shot up or burned up because we had to use aviation gasoline.
That'll burn them up.
And burn them up in a hurry. So mainly the transportation was on foot.
It's a long walk from like Guy and Galt down to Bataan.
Yeah, it's a long walk.
Did you, granted it was a very confusing situation, did you have any sense that anybody was in charge, or were you just sort of on your own up there?
No, we had a line of command as we moved back into the town. And we had a good commanding officer, and we were held together pretty well. And the Filipino soldiers, as long as the American officers would stay there with them, and we were in evidence, they would stand and fight. And when the American officers started to check on the supplies in the rear, the Filipinos wanted to go with them.
Did you lose a number of officers on the way back, or?
No, as we moved back into Bataan, we didn't lose too many. And we were in pretty good shape, and we defended our positions well until the latter part of March, early April of 41. But we were running short on food, running short on ammunition, and so as time went on, and we had a lot of hand-to-hand combat, we just ran out of food and books.
So there weren't adequate supplies then of food or ammunition?
No, there was no way to supply us. No ships got through. You just lived off the land, carabao or anything you could find to eat.
Did you see anything of MacArthur or Wainwright or?
Not during the conflict. Of course, I was over there for several months before the war started, and I would see MacArthur riding around with Kazan in the car, you know. And MacArthur, I thought, was a very brilliant general, but he was very egotistical and he seldom returned a salute.
I hadn't heard that.
Interesting story. Before the war started, General Wainwright, we worked half a day when we got over there. And then we were free. Officers called about 11:30, and we were free the rest of the day, most of the time. I was in the officers' barber shop in the bottom of the officers' club there one day, and General Wainwright was in there getting his hair cut. So he told the Filipino barber, he said, "I want you to shave my head." And so the Filipino barber said, "General, do you really want me to shave it?" He said, "Yes." He said, "All the time I've been over here, I wanted my head shaved, and my wife never would let me do it." he said, now that she's sent home, I want you to shave my head. And I was sitting there laughing at him. And he was very friendly.
What did he look like with his head shaved?
He just looked like Jordan. Only wasn't that dark.
You, getting back to that time in March and April, I would imagine you ran short of medical supplies as well.
Yeah, very. About all we had was a little Ativan for malaria. And of course we didn't have access to much. Many medical officers or anything for severe wounds, they had to send them back to the rear.
Back to Corregidor or
No,
something?
well, back around, they had a hospital facility at Mariveles. But Corregidor really had the best facilities. And it was about, seems to me, it was a couple of miles, mile and a half across from the tip of Mariveles to Corregidor.
You understood that unless there were reinforcements, this thing was going to end only one way?
The war plan, as I understood it, said if we could hold out for 6 months, reinforcements would be there. And of course we believed that. But we had lots of rumors that the ships were coming, and there was a landing of our friendly troops on the bottom of the Tan, but nothing ever materialized. So we realized pretty well into March and April that was unlikely that we would ever get any help.
Were you personally in pretty good health still by that time, or were you getting pretty run down?
My health held up pretty well. I was thin, and we were on short rations.
What do short rations mean?
Well, usually maybe rice twice a day. Once in a while we might have some carabao meat, something like that. But that a canteen cupful of rice was a good meal.
That's tough to keep on going day after day like that.
Well, it is, but surprisingly you hold up pretty well. If you're just like anything else, additive. But I will say that until we were overwhelmed, that the Philippine troops did a real outstanding job of staying in position and fighting, because they were, it was their country and they were fighting for their country, and they had no love for the Japanese. We were in a firefight one day, and I had this little Japanese orderly that was with me, and we came upon this Jap who had been shot in the neck. He was lying in the bank of a creek. So I told my orderly, he wasn't dead, and I thought he was going to live, and I told my orderly, I said, now you stay here and watch him, and I'll come back and we'll send him back to the rear for interrogation. So I was back in about 15 minutes, and the little Filipino had turned him upside down and stuck his head in the creek. He was drowned because their feeling was very, very strong about the Japanese invading their country.
When did you get the word or how did you get the word that you were going to have to surrender?
Well, at the end, we were moving back, we were retreating, and we moved back, clear back to the last line of resistance. And at that time, we met a scout outfit when we had gone back and even gotten through some Japanese lines to get back to.
So they'd gotten behind you by then?
Yep. Yeah. And then we were told that General King had gone forward to request surrender. And that's how we learned it. But we knew our position was very perilous.
How did you feel? Do you remember?
Well, it's hard to express how you would feel in those circumstances.
Now, I never faced that, and I just...
I guess you are resigned to live a day at a time and take it as it comes. And that, I think that's the way I felt. You didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know what you wanted to do, whether you wanted to try to escape up in the hills and try to fight guerrilla tactics, or whether you would surrender with most of your troops.
Anybody you know get up into the hills safely, or?
Yeah, there were some people, a couple of guys that I knew that went up in the hills and made it throughout the war.
Americans, you mean? Or?
Yeah, Americans. Mm-hmm. But by and large, the troops were so hungry and so exhausted, and by that time so disorganized that, and the Japs were coming in on us pretty fast. You didn't have much time to make a decision to try to escape.
And of course, if you're ordered to surrender as a member of the military, then you don't, at least under military law, you don't have the option. Now, some people did take it and head out, but if the order comes to surrender, then that's what you do, it seems to me.
That's what you do. Now, are you interested in experiences in the prison camp?
Oh, certainly. I'm thinking about you had seen the Japanese, you had fought with them, but now you're facing them in an entirely different context, and I was wondering what that was like, your first contacts with them and what happened.
Well, they were very ruthless. They stripped you of all your possessions, rings, watches, all of those things. And in the Japanese army, a two-star private can stand a one-star private up and beat on him, because that's the way they exercise rank or discipline. So we were treated, by and large, in that same fashion. So the transition into prison camp was rough, and by that time so many people were infected with dysentery and malaria, and we had no medicine, and the troops were dying at a very fast rate. Our rations were very low.
How long a march was it from your capture to, where did you go? To Cabanatuan or to?
Well, the trip was from almost at Mariveles up to O'Donnell, which was near Tarlac.
Okay.
Okay, so that trip took a long time. We lost. Well, you've got some pretty good accounting of the death march.
Yeah.
And so, I don't want to go into that in detail because you've got that, right?
Well, the numbers that you see in the books usually are between 75 and 80,000 surrendered. the number who made it to Camp O'Donnell, somewhere along the way, they lost about 25,000. Now, some escaped along the way, many died. But the figures are never going to be very accurately known because we don't know how many surrendered to begin with.
I doubt that there were 80,000 troops. I'd say more like, and I'm just guessing, 50.
50,000?
And probably I'm going to say we got to O'Donnell with 8,000 Americans and maybe 20,000 Filipinos.
So that's half. Did you have a certain group that you stayed with on the march?
You'd stay with your buddies and try to protect them.
About how many were in that group that you were with? A dozen or 50?
No, not that many. Maybe 7 guys that you would be close to. And try to protect them, make them get up and move when we could.
Did the 7 of you make it? Or no?
No, 4. But the fact that people were in poor health and they didn't give us adequate rations and they didn't give us an opportunity to drink water that was drinkable just caused an awful lot of dysentery. And when somebody was down, they couldn't get up, and we couldn't carry them, the Japs would leave them or shoot them. It's pretty tough.
Did you expect anything better when you got to Camp O'Donnell? The idea that if you could make this march, then maybe it would be better down the road?
Well, you always expect something better. If you don't, if you don't look forward to anything better, you're in real trouble. But that was not a good experience. But then moving from O'Donnell to Cabanatuan, it was much, much better.
Was that a march to Cabanatuan or a march?
Yeah, everything was a march. I'll tell you an interesting story about that. We had a fella in the camp, his name was Hornbostel, and he had been an engineer in the gold mines up there, and he was a man up in his 60s. So, along the route from O'Donnell to Cabanatuan, he picked up a stick on the road, and to help him, When we got to Cabanatuan, the rainy season started, and he stuck this stick in the ground, and that stick sprouted and began to grow, and it became a bougainvillea bush as big as this room. And when we got back, I thought that was so interesting. I turned that story into Reader's Digest, but they didn't pick it up, no.
That's too bad. Yeah, that's a good story.
Yeah, that is a good story. And Hornbostel made it through, and his wife had contracted leprosy. And he went down to Louisiana and stayed with her in the leper camp, and she recovered, and they left there, and he lived for some number of years after the war. And I guess he was nearly mid-60s at that time. I know he was over 60.
He's a good, sturdy fella.
Yeah. Now there was some publicity on that, but I thought that was quite a compliment to that fellow.
How long a march was it? Do you remember from O'Donnell to Cabanatuan? How many days or?
Well, we didn't all go together. I guess 40, 50 miles.
Make it in 2 or 3 days?
Yeah. You had some pretty emaciated troops going over there.
I imagine your shoes were given out by then,
Yeah.
boots?
Yeah, well, you didn't get any supplies. Your clothing, just the rags you had. Because the Japs took away most everything, all your possessions.
And they didn't issue you anything?
Well, you know, it was hot over there, and they issued us a G-string. A lot of us, you know, went around primarily in just a G-string.
What was how long were you at Cabanatuan? Do you remember?
Probably September, I'm going to say August or September of 42 until we got on the prison ship in December of 44.
So a year and a half?
2 years, I guess.
Yeah, close. Oh, yeah, over 2 years. Over 2 years.
They took us from Cabanatuan down to Bilibid Prison in Manila. And then they shipped us out from Bilibid Prison. We were in Bilibid about a month, I guess.
Now, what was the day like at Cabanatuan? What were the days similar, one after the other?
Well, I worked. I chopped wood for the kitchen, the Jap kitchen, and on that job, I really got some extra rations, and I was in pretty good shape at that time. And then we worked on a farm. We raised cassava root, which are like sweet potatoes, corn, and our treatment at Cabanatuan and our food at Cabanatuan was probably the best camp that I was in during my internment.
Why do you think that was? Any idea?
Well, it depended on who were the Japanese officers in charge of the camp and who your guards were. And a lot of our guards at Cabanatuan were young kids who really had seen little or no combat, or they were older troops who had guard duty because they had been infected by venereal disease or something like that and weren't fit for combat.
Did you have nicknames for them?
Yeah, we had nicknames for them. You may have heard this story. We had one guy that we called Donald Duck. And so one day, he asked us who Donald Duck was. And we told him he was a famous American movie star. So some way he found out who Donald Duck really was. And the guys that told him, he got after him and stood him up and beat him with a stick, gave him some terrible beatings. But yeah, we had our own nicknames for a lot of the guards.
The bad ones particularly?
Yeah.
Some were worse than others?
Oh yes. Some were much worse than others. And the interpreter that we had at Cabanatuan was not a very good guy. He translated, made a lot of mistakes in his translation.
Did you get any Red Cross parcels while you were there?
Yeah, I think I got maybe at Cabana to 1, maybe 3. I'm not positive, but it seems to me it was 3.
Did they make a difference?
Oh man, yes, that was delicious.
Remember what was in them?
Well, some sea rations and some chocolate and some. Seems to me there was some coffee in there or cocoa.
Did you get any mail, or were you allowed to write any letters or cards?
The Japs let us write some farm cards. And I think I got 3 to go back home that my family received, 3 or 4. And the Japs had written on there places for you to fill it out. I mean, they'd fill it out for you like I'm well, I'm happy, and then you could sign your own name. That was, I think all of those cards we were allowed to send at Cabana Tuan. I don't think I had an opportunity after that.
In over 2 years, then 3 postcards, essentially.
Yeah.
These were written to your parents, or?
Well, you could write to whomever you want.
Yeah,
I
but
wrote
you-
1 to my fiancée and 2 to my parents.
Oh, you were engaged.
Yeah. Yeah, I was engaged. She was going to come over there, and before she could get over there, they said all dependents, or future dependents, those that are here after leaving, nobody else could come.
Long war for your parents and your fiancée, too.
Yeah, but you know that gal waited for me all that time,
Good for you both.
and we got married in January of 46.
Did you have any kind of medical facilities at Cabana Tuan?
Very basic. We just didn't ever have any thing like a hospital. The experience on the ship going from the Philippines to Japan was probably the roughest experience that I had during my internment. We started out with about 1,600, and we got to Japan with about 400.
You lost 3 out of 4 then.
Yeah, we were bombed first in Subic Bay, and it was our ship. There was no markings on the ship. The ship was loaded with Red Cross supplies, but that was for the Japanese, our supplies, but it was for the Japanese. And when our planes came over, the ship ran aground, and they finally opened up we were down in hatches at the bottom. They finally opened up the hatches and let us get out and swim ashore. And they had put up machine guns on the shore so that we had to swim that path to the shore, which seemed like a long, long way, but probably was not more than a little less than half a mile.
It's a long ways.
Yeah, it's a long way. And there was a lot of timbers in the water, and if there was somebody, you'd jump overboard, and if there was somebody there that you could help get on a board or something and help push them to shore. When we got ashore, there was a tennis court there at Subic Bay, and it was boarded up on the sides. And they stuck us in this tennis court. And we were there for 3 days, and during that 3 days we had, I think I had 3 spoons full of raw rice. And we had 1 water spigot in there. We had all these guys crowded in there, and there really was not room for everybody to lie down. And you had to take turns standing up and hunker down or lie down. And your buddies, as I say, we usually have 6 or 8 guys together. And one stood in the water line, one of us continually going around to get enough water. And there were an awful lot of wounded. And
As a result of the bombing?
yeah, as a result of the bombing. The good guys couldn't make it. I had a doctor friend, Colonel Jack Swartz, who tried to do some amputations with a little scalpel. And no anesthetic, no nothing. But, infection set in, and it was necessary to try to amputate. After that, they put us on a train.
Let me interrupt just a second. Did you continue to have some kind of command structure with was there a senior officer in the group? And
Yes, there was always, I think we were in pretty good shape for leadership. But so much of it was a matter of attitude and a desire to survive on a day-to-day basis. And you would try to help those who felt they weren't going to make it. And I think one of the critical things was that if you thought you weren't going to make it, if you gave up physically or mentally, you just did not survive. The will to survive was probably the greatest attribute you can have.
you wonder why some people had it and some people lost it.
This may not be a fair statement, but I noticed that the men, you can't dodge a bullet. You don't know the circumstance. But those who had lived with a silver spoon had never had much opportunity to be independent before they got in service. Seemed to be the ones with the least desire to live and the first ones to give up. And those who had had a pretty tough childhood or youth or had to live and matured early in their life had the best outlook.
Interesting.
So a strong desire to make it made a big difference.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've read it, and I've heard it from others as well. That once that went, if you saw it go in somebody, and you couldn't regenerate it, then it was probably over.
You're right.
But it must have seemed as though you were just climbing one mountain to find another mountain. I mean, from Cabanatuan to Billabut to the ship.
Well, yeah. But, it's amazing how strong a desire you have to maintain life. And when you think about how good it's going to be when you get home.
What did you think about when you thought about how good it was going to be? What sorts of things did you think about?
Food.
Okay.
Food was a big desire, and I don't know whether you want this on the tape or not, but it didn't take long to lose your sex drive.
I've understood that.
And food was a big factor, and we talked for hours about when we got home what we would have, and the guys would think about menus, and that was a big part of our discussions.
Okay, you said you were on a train after
Right, they
that
put
tennis
us-
court in Subic?
They put us on this train, and they put us in there and crowded us in there where you couldn't sit down, and closed the door, and there was these cars. There wasn't any air getting in there. We had a lot of people that passed out in that circumstance, and some of them died. And they took us to San Fernando La Union. And we were there maybe one or maybe 2 nights. One night we stayed on the beach. I think it was Christmas Eve of '44. And the next day they put us on a ship and we headed for Japan.
Again.
Same circumstance down in the hold. We got to the harbor at Takao in Formosa, and our planes bombed again. And they made some direct hits. We lost 400 or 500 people there. And it was there that my best friend, we were sitting together, and he was hit with a big plank, not any shelling or bombs. He was hit with a big plank on his head, and he died in my arms. And
All that you had been through together.
yeah, this was a boy from NC State. And anyway,
Had he been with you in the Philippine Scouts? Or
yeah, we'd been together all along. And so the Japanese would not let anybody come down in a hole where all of these wounded and dead people were. And after 3 or 4 days, they said we're going to have a burial party. And they picked out certain ones who they thought were physically able to survive that. And I happened to be one of those. So what they did is they took a lighter and a big net, and they would take the guys that were dead, and we had to throw them in these nets, and took them over the side, and we had to get in these lighters, and we went out to a big sort of a sandy beach, dug a hole, and threw these guys in, and we just had to drag them from the boat across the sand and into the hole, and then we covered them up. And that was a pretty rough experience because they had been dead for 3 or 4 days and they didn't stay in one piece. And that was probably the experience with the worst feeling in my feeling towards the treatment of the Japs. So, anyway, they put us on another ship, and from there we got to Japan safely. We were, if we were attacked by torpedoes, we didn't know it. Anyway, we got to Japan safely, and it was cold as the very devil in Japan.
In Japan, were you?
We landed at Moji. Moji, M-O-J-I.
I don't know where that is.
Well, I don't know exactly. It's on the coast and down below Tokyo.
Okay.
And from there, they took us by train to the province of Kyushu. And from Kyushu, we stayed there until the spring of '45.
What were you doing there? Were you in a camp? Or?
Yeah, we were in camp there, and we were sewing uniforms for the Japanese labor force. we, as I said, we stayed there until the spring of 45, and they moved us then by train and ship and train again from Busan, which is at the bottom of Korea,
Right.
up to until the war was over.
What were you doing in Korea?
In Korea, we worked in the gardens, and that was our principal job.
Could you steal food to eat there? or-
Well, you tried to. I was pretty sick over there.
Malaria or
Yeah,
dysentery,
dysentery primarily, yeah. I was down to about less than 100 pounds.
you're a pretty tall fellow for 100 pounds.
And I was so weak that I couldn't get up by myself. I'd have to crawl over against a building or a tree and prop myself up inch at a time to get up.
Did you know that the war was almost over, or that
We at the end, we could see the American planes over. And we could talk to the Koreans who would come into the camp to take out the benjo buckets. And we knew that things were going our way. And
that made it easier for you to hang on?
Oh, sure. And about 2 weeks before the Americans came in to rescue us, the Japs told us the war was over and that they were leaving. And they left us to our own devices in the camp. And the American planes came over, and these were B-17s or B-24s, and they had some big 55-gallon drums, and they were parachutes. They were tied on the parachutes with ropes. And when they dropped those things, of course, the parachutes wouldn't open, and they all came down whop and busted open, and cans of fruit salad went flying everywhere.
Dangerous, too.
And one man got a broken leg out of it. It was the only casualty I remember. But there was an oil slick outside, right outside our camp, and there was a drum full of number 10 size cans of cocoa. And when that thing hit the oil slick and we saw that out there, a bunch of us ran out there and just scooped it up with our hands and ate it. This same Jack Swartz, who was in my camp, we had one little area there that we called a dispensary, and he still had nothing but this little scalpel. And so all of it happened to fall through the shack that was our dispensary. So I had a lot of malnutrition sores on me, and we were good friends. So he was looking at the medical supplies. And he saw this one bottle, and he said, Jim, he said, I don't know what this is, but it says on the bottle penicillin. Penicillin?
Penicillin.
So he said, this is penicillin, and he said, I know it isn't going to hurt you. And he said, you're the first guy in this camp that's going to get a shot of penicillin. So anyway, the strength in those days wasn't very much, not nearly as strong as it is today. So it did, and as we got some food, of course, I began to gain weight, and the sores began to heal. One other story I might tell you that might be interesting. When it wasn't too far into the city, we were just right on the edge of the city. So when the Japs left, we had freedom to go into town. And the Japs had paid us off in this paper money. And we didn't know that the yen had any value. We thought it was just worthless. So we went into town with this money and bought this old bull. I think we paid 9 or 10,000 yen for him. We brought him back into camp. We had an old rope and we brought him back into camp. So we were going to cook him. Well, it was about dark, and we had a great big black pot, that would cook rice and stuff in it. So we had the water boiling. We were trying to kill this old bull. And all we had was a wooden mallet. And all of us were just, we weren't very strong. And we'd hit this bull over the head with a mallet. And we'd take turns, and we'd take turns. And I guess we did that for 5 or 6 hours before we finally got that old bull down. And somebody found an old knife that was rusty and everything, but did have some edge on it. We were able to slit his throat and kill the bull. So we skinned him, and we put him in the pot, and by about 8 o'clock the next morning, the meat was done enough for us to eat.
That was a tough bull.
That was a tough bull, but that sure was good, because we'd had no meat, for ages. But you remember experiences like that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first Americans you saw?
Yeah, the Americans came in there, and of course they looked great to us.
Had they flown in or come in by boat?
They came in by ship.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the experiences when they finally got us all ready to go ashore on this hospital ship, and they took us in LCIs from shore out to the ship, and they had spotlights on the ship. And of course we didn't, when they had dropped all this food, we didn't want to give up anything. We didn't want to give up. We were clutching that food, and they said, throw it away. We'll get all you want to eat. But anyway, there were about 6 or so nurses up on the bridge of the hospital ship when we were coming in to go aboard. And we looked up there, and every one of those girls looked like movie stars to us. We had not seen anything so beautiful in all our lives. So they got us aboard, and they got us in the shower and got us all cleaned off and threw away the Quan cans that we had with beans in it and so forth. And we stayed on the hospital ship for about one night, and then they took us by ship from there to the Philippines.
It must have been such a reversal for you to have somebody treating you kindly rather than cruelly.
It was just unbelievable. It was hard to imagine that we were in the hands of the Americans in the good fortune, and that we could go down in the galley and eat all we wanted to eat at any time, and anything that was down there. And you'd go down in the galley and you'd eat, and you'd come back, and some people would disgorge, and go back down and eat again. And you'd sleep a couple hours, and then you'd go back and eat some more. And it was a great period of time.
Yeah, everybody must have looked good to you.
Everybody looked good. Yeah, everything looked good. And of course we were anxious to catch up on the news, because we experienced little or no news on that period of time, what had happened.
Lots of changes in the country. Roosevelt had died, atomic bomb going off.
We didn't know anything about the bomb, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So we were there at that deployment staging area outside of Manila for maybe a week. And it was a rainy season, and planes weren't flying. So we wanted to get on anything that was going in the right direction. So we got aboard ship and came home by ship and got home in late September, early October of 45.
Did you come into San Francisco or Seattle? Or
San Francisco, yeah. Yeah, that was a great experience. Coming in there and the band came out to play for us, and the flags were flying. And happy time. Yep.
Remember how many of you there were on the ship? Was it hundreds or dozens?
Yeah, you mean on the ship coming back?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were loaded with soldiers, not all prisoners.
Not all prisoners.
No, but primarily prisoners. Yeah. We were getting some money, and according to your rank, I think field grade officers got so much, company grade officers got so much.
Were you lieutenant or captain?
Captain.
Captain.
And enlisted men. Sergeants got so much, enlisted men so the poker game started, And some of those guys lost all of their back pay. Not all their back pay, all the cash they had. Well, they gave IOUs for a lot of it. Whether those were ever collected, I don't know. I hope not. But anyway, lots of poker games going on the ship coming back.
Did you play some poker yourself?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We were playing table stakes. And I was maybe ahead a couple $1,000. And we were playing draw poker. And I guess I had $1,500 in front of me. And so there were, I think, in the game. And I had 2 pair going in and drew 1 card, and I had kings and 4s, 3 kings, 2 4s. So we ran the pot up, and there was a second lieutenant in the Air Force, and he had drawn 3 cards. And so when we got through, and all the money that was on the table between the 2 of us was in there, there was nearly $5,000 in the pot. And that was a lot of money. And I just knew, I saw me driving down the road in that new Buick convertible. I knew I had won that. That guy had 2 queens, and he had drawn 2 queens. Now that, the odds are against that. Drawn 3 cards and drawn 2 queens. And
2 to a pair.
So I was still a little ahead, and I got out of the poker game. I didn't play any more poker.
You didn't get the Buick convertible.
I didn't get the Buick convertible.
But you got home.
I got home, and I was from a little town in Missouri, and the Chevrolet dealer was a good friend. And he wanted, and in those days you had to be in line to get a car. So he wanted to give me a car and put the picture in the paper and all. My dad said, "No, son." He said, "You're going to take your turn, and you're going to put in for a car, and when your turn comes, you get a car." And in those days, you did what your parents said, even though
you were
I was out of college. So that's exactly what happened. I waited my turn to get a car. But I thought that was pretty tough, but I survived that too.
How did you get back from the West Coast to Missouri? By train? Or?
On the train, yeah. We went first up to Swananoa, up near Asheville.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
And we were there, and then they released us, and I went home for maybe 2 weeks, and then went back. In the meantime, my wife had joined the Marine Corps. She was a trainer instructor.
Oh.
My brother had joined the Marine Corps, and they were both at Cherry Point. And so we decided to get married in January. So she got leave, and my brother went AWOL and came home, and we got married, and then we all went back to Cherry Point. So.
Were you discharged?
No, I had, they did a lot of testing at Swannanoa, and then finally I had all of that terminal leave covered, and went on leave, and then I went back to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, and was discharged there, and I still had some more leave, so I had a pretty long time, and I came back to my career in the insurance business before the leave was over.
When you were in North Carolina, a broader question, did you ever see or write to the relatives of the best friend that you lost?
Yes, I went down to a little town in the eastern part of the state. This boy's name was John, Kerr,
Carr?
And John's father was deceased, and his mother had been the postmistress in this little town. And shortly after, when I was discharged from Swannanoa, Camp Moore General Hospital, we went down to visit John's mother and spent the night and talked to her about John and what a great fellow he was and our friendship and experiences. And most of my friends happened to be from North and South Carolina. I had another friend who was from Martinsville, Virginia, and I went up to see his parents and visited with them. So I did have that opportunity to tell the parents a little bit about them and their experiences.
It was a good thing for them, a hard thing for you.
Terribly hard, but very much appreciated by them.
You must have you couldn't have gone through this without developing some pretty strong feelings about the Japanese.
A lot of people ask me that question, and yes, that's true. I had some very strong opinions, but the Japanese military ruled the country. They made all the decisions. And the civilian population had no say-so in what was going on during the war. And so my ill will or my feeling has been pretty much directed to the military. And I don't hold any animosity towards the Japanese civilian population as such. But I do recognize and that our treatment was very unfair and very cruel. And I don't have any sympathy for the Japanese military. But I think, the more time that goes by, you try to take a Christian attitude about those things and understand that the people today had nothing to do with that, and they don't At my age, the people that I talk to are the Japanese. They don't even know anything about what went on in World War II.
Maybe they should.
Well, I think they should, but if you weren't involved in it, and maybe it was only your grandparents that were involved in it, they've lost touch, and I don't think the Japanese are anxious to talk about the history, family to family, about the war, except about the bad things that happened to them because of the atomic bomb.
You probably, and again, this is a question that I've asked, or people have talked to me about, there must be some, not question in your mind, but you must note that you made it and other people didn't. And that, it seems to me, must be a kind of hard thing to deal with.
Yes, it's a very hard thing to deal with, but when the man is dead, he goes on to another life. The hard part is for the survivors. And I know that I have two brothers, both were Marines, both made it through, but both died, one boy at 60 and one at 61, and they were close together. Both of those boys were survived by my mother, and my mother said to me, Jim, you just don't know how difficult it is to lose a son. And so you think of those experiences of how the young soldier was killed and the parent had many years to live to think about that. Although I feel very strongly that those of us who fought and those who died for a good cause. I would hate to think what the world would have been like if the Russians and the Germans and the Japanese regimes had won. It might have taken a long time for us to get back to a democratic way of life.
I always ask towards the end of an interview, is there anything else you can think about that you want to be sure that I know?
How long have we been talking?
An hour and a half?
Well, I don't think so. I think it was, I don't know whether anybody can relate the thrill and the experience of coming back to family and friends. And I think as we spoke, you can't dodge the bullet. But the experience of having grown up in a strong family, where there was a lot of love and a lot of desire to come back to that circumstance, and a strong belief in God. Help me get back. So I'm just very thankful that I was one of the lucky ones. this was about a year ago. My grandson Pete was home at Christmas time, and he was into my World War II memorabilia. And so he was very fascinated with it. So he said to me, he said, "Grandpa, could I take this back to my school for show and tell?"
How old is Pete?
Pete was then 6 years old. So I said, "Yeah, Pete, you can do that." And he said, "Oh, Grandpa, that's great." And he had gotten things down pretty well. So I said, "Well, Pete, in fact, I'll tell you," I said, "you are so interested in this, more interested than my boys were, that when I die, I'll leave these medals and things to you." And he said, "Grandpa," he said, "that's great." He said, "I hope you don't die too soon." And I said, "Well, Pete, I agree with that. I hope I don't either." So he took them to school and for show and tell. And that evening, his best buddy, Kevin's father, called my daughter. And they live in the same neighborhood, and said, "Katie, Kevin said that Peter said that his grandpa won these medals in the Civil War." And when I heard that, I just rolled on the floor.
He's got the right idea, just wrong.
He got the,
his time a little wrong.
His title and his time was a little bit off, but I thought that was so cute.
You know, it frequently is the case that grandchildren will pick up an interest more than children did. That for some reason or other, that interest sometimes skips a generation.
Yeah. Another thing that happened during our wedding ceremony, I brought back a Japanese sword, and at the cake cutting ceremony, which she had, as I told you, come home from Cherry Point to for the wedding. Somehow she had gotten hold of my sword, and she decided we'd cut the cake with that sword. So we did. And I set the sword down, and I thought somebody was going to take it and clean it off, you know. She stuck it back in the scabbard with all that icing from the cake. We almost got divorced on the scene. So we laughed about that.
How did you pick up the sword?
Well, you know, there was when the Americans came in, and 2 weeks before that, the Japanese left. But they were pretty frightened at that time, and we got a hold of some of their weapons. Not pistols, but swords and things like that. They were willing to give them up.
You still have the sword?
Yeah. There was something advertised in a magazine that I picked up where there was a guy in Pekin, Illinois, was saying that he would pay between $200,000 and $200,000 for Japanese swords. But this was not the sword of an officer. This was probably a sergeant's sword, and it had where it had been stuck back in the scabbard. You know, it had some rust spots on it. I didn't think it was. For $200, I'd keep it.
Keep it.
Yeah.
Keep it.
Yeah.